I got some questions here. I recently got an email from a recently graduated art school student, someone who just finished their, I believe, 4-year education at, I think it was an art school in Ohio. And this person reached out to ask me some questions as a recent grad. I get emails and messages like this quite often, actually, and I never really know how to respond. I want to help out as much as I can, but at the same time, I don't necessarily see myself as somebody with all the answers or with really that many answers at all. Maybe that seems a little bit strange for somebody who has a YouTube channel, but I try not to frame these videos as someone who knows everything or is an expert at whatever it is I'm talking about. I'm just very, very interested in comics, comic art, illustration, visual storytelling. It happens to be what I do for a living as well. But even with all of that, there's so much that I'm still trying to figure out myself, from the creative aspect of it to the business aspect of it. And with this channel and whatever kinds of videos and content I make online, I try to approach it from the vantage point of someone who's just trying to figure it out, just like you. Perhaps I know a little bit more in certain areas, and I'm sure there's plenty of you out there that know way more in other areas. So when somebody reaches out to me via DM or email with questions, I want to help out, but at the same time, I don't want to pretend that I have all the answers. And I also don't want to just make up an answer for the sake of responding. Also, sometimes it is really busy and it's hard to message everybody back. So I'm hoping that even making this video isn't an invitation to get a whole bunch of unsolicited emails. But whoever I do answer back, I want to give them quality, honest answers. Anyway, I thought there's probably someone else out there that might be watching this video too, who has similar, if not the same exact questions. So I could kind of kill two birds with one stone and address August's questions while also addressing maybe some of yours as well. I don't know if these are going to be great, amazing answers, but I'll try my best to just answer them as honestly as I can. So here we go. Who should I be reaching out to, and where should I reach out from? There's two different ways of making money as an artist. You can be a freelancer, provide a service, get hired to do that, or you can create something and try to sell that to an audience. But assuming you're looking to get hired here, I would say the person you should be reaching out to is anyone who is an editor, if it's comics, and if it's just illustration work, anyone who is an art director or a creative director. And where should I reach out from? Email. If you could find their email, sometimes an unsolicited email can be welcomed. Other times, there's some people that don't want that, and it'll just end up in their junk or they'll just delete it. No harm, no foul. I think LinkedIn is really good. LinkedIn, you kind of assume that people are there to have these professional sort of interactions. Someone in a position of hiring is probably used to getting emails on there about their work and about being hired. So I would say LinkedIn is pretty good. I think sometimes as artists, we overlook these platforms that any other professional would use, and LinkedIn is one of them that happens to be, in my experience, somewhat helpful. Outside of that, it would be in more interpersonal, real-life situations, like going to an art event, an opening. I'm from New York. I used to live in New York for a really long time, so New York has a really big illustration scene, a pretty big, comic and cartooning scene as well. There's places like the Society of Illustrators. There's also galleries. So there's always like an opening or some sort of event. And a lot of times the people who go there are editors and art directors, as well as other artists. You never really want to come off as like salesy or disingenuous. I never like when someone approaches me with some sort of ulterior motive. I don't think anybody likes that. So I would say try to do it in the most natural way possible. I think it's just good to try and meet those people, and at the very least, see if that's a world and the type of people that you would even want to work with. But I think if you go to an event like that, looking to make contacts and sort of get hired or get people to know who you are, that kind of comes across as disingenuous, and I don't think anybody likes that. And it just feels very salesy. So I would say that the in-person stuff probably goes the furthest long term, but it really does have to be done in as much of a natural way as possible. And I think you really just have to go into it not expecting to get really anything out of it. Okay, here's another one. Should I be looking at potential agents, or does that come later? I think it depends on the type of work that you're going for. As far as like the more broadly termed illustration world, there's all different kinds of illustration jobs. There's like the more simpler ones that are probably much easier to get just from artist to art director. And then there are bigger jobs like with bigger brands, perhaps working on some sort of campaign, specifically like in the advertising world. Those jobs are harder to get just like from one person to another. Oftentimes there's some sort of third party, an intermediate party that is kind of like attaching an artist to a company and a brand. So if you're looking to get that kind of work, which wouldn't be a bad idea, those jobs pay more than other types of illustration jobs, I would say an agent would be very helpful in that area. But it's just like anything else. It's going to be just as hard to get illustration job or a comic gig as it is to find an agent who's going to want to take you on. So I'd say at least in the beginning, it's probably helpful to build up your portfolio on your own, because one of the first things, if not the very first thing that an agent is going to want to look for is someone who is already hireable, who has already proven themselves. There's not too many reps that are going to want to like take a chance on a brand new artist that has never been hired before and never proven themselves to even meet a deadline. So I think like everything else, you kind of have to like prove yourself first, and then you have a much better chance of getting representation. But after a certain amount of time getting jobs on your own, you might find a knack for that and realize that maybe you don't even need to have an agent, and therefore you wouldn't have to give up a certain percentage of your payments either, which is always helpful. So having an agent is a double-edged sword. I've never had an agent personally. It's still not something I completely rule out. Maybe one day I will, but so far there hasn't been any agents, knocking down my door trying to take me on. So until then, that's my best piece of advice regarding agents. All right, another question. Was there a book or lesson outside of school that you found helpful? I've talked a lot on this channel about books and all that kind of stuff, so I don't want to be repetitive about that. There's plenty of other artists too that have given really great book suggestions, but a lesson outside of school that I found helpful, I would say most of the lessons that I've learned as a professional artist are the things that I did actually learn outside of school. The real life experience, the kind of lessons that sort of propel you in your career and prepare you for your next phase are the things that you learn when you're just doing it. It's in the doing that you'll sort of realize your shortcomings, you'll realize your mistakes, and hopefully try and correct those mistakes for the next go. So it's hard to say off the top of my head what the biggest lesson I have learned is, but I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that there's art and then there's commerce and business. And those two things are very separate. When you draw in your sketchbook at night and it's just you and your headphones on and you're having a good time and you're just thinking up ideas or just drawing what's in front of you, it's a pleasurable experience, something that you do perhaps to relax, wind down, or even kind of like get yourself excited about making art, scratch a creative itch, whatever it might be. That is very, very different than doing all the things that so far I've talked about in these previous questions, which is essentially creating a business, putting yourself in a position to be hired, creating a sort of like brand and an audience that you can then connect with. Those are very different things than that, person drawing in their sketchbook at night having a really good time. And in order to be a professional artist, you have to, in a weird way, put those two things together, those very, very different things together. And oftentimes, the person who's really good at drawing in their sketchbook and painting on a canvas isn't always the best person at the business commerce side of things. And so the lesson that I have perhaps learned is that because I might be inclined to make art and maybe I'm okay at it, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be all that good at like presenting it to the public or selling it to the public or getting hired. In order to do this whole thing professionally, you have to get good at both. But the only way to get good at both is to, for me at least, recognize that those are two separate things. And then as you get better at doing those two separate things, eventually and hopefully you'll get good at putting those two things together. Art is very subjective, and the business world is much less subjective. It actually plays by a certain kind of like playbook. There's rules and there's strategies. And it's been my experience that the artists that I've met and known who are actually like successful are the ones who realize that those are two separate things, two separate skills. So in short, I guess that's the lesson I learned. Separating yourself as the artist and the business person, I think is just helpful. It's a good place to start. And I think the earlier you could potentially learn that lesson, the better. Are there subjects, techniques I should be consistently practicing? That was the other question. The basics, perspective, composition, all that stuff is gonna help you in any kind of comic art and illustration stuff. You have to keep trying to get better and keep learning and sort of like stimulating your mind in order to keep getting better. Otherwise, your skills will sort of like atrophy. What's been your favorite project to work on? My favorite project was, at least professionally speaking, was I did like a little 8-page short story for Archie Comics. I had done a lot of stuff for them prior to that, but I always worked with a writer. And this was the first time I got to write my own story and draw it as well. And then I also drew it traditionally with ink on paper. So I felt like a real comic book artist. As far as comics go, as far as published work goes, that would be my favorite so far. But I generally am not crazy about most of the things that I have done. I'm always kind of striving to do better. And I'm kind of like excited to do something really, really cool one day. I don't feel like I've done that yet. I certainly don't feel like I have. So that kind of keeps me motivated and keeps me going. And then there's one last question here. I think it's a pretty good question. It says, if there's one place to start, where would it be? Start with the basics, start with the fundamentals. You could always be a better artist. Sometimes it's a strategy problem. Sometimes it is that you just need to educate yourself a little bit more on perhaps the marketing side of things or the networking side of things, the business side of things. Perhaps that's what it is, and sometimes it is. But sometimes you have to kind of just ask yourself, is it my work? Can I be better? And I think the answer is always yes. Recently, I've been trying to like rework my fundamentals just by going back to some basic books and things like that. Andrew Loomis, George Bridgman. And when I do try and practice those things, I humble myself greatly, realizing that, do I even know how to draw a head or a face or a body at all? I sort of think of myself as like a figurative artist, someone who likes to draw figures. But then when I sort of approach it from a student perspective and try to push myself, I realize there's very little that I actually even know about what it is that I'm drawing. And so I think in a certain way to try to always remind yourself that you could always be better, and it shouldn't come from like a negative place where you're like beating up on yourself. It should come from a place of like just wanting to get better, thinking of your work as something that's important. And if it is, it should be always getting better and improving. So yeah, in short, try to keep challenging yourself and pushing yourself, and hopefully do it in a way that doesn't completely discourage you from moving on, but rather encourages you to see the benefits of coming at things from like a student's perspective. So I don't know if that made any sense, but it sort of did in my head. I'll see when I watch this back. But that's it. Thanks, August, for the email. Hopefully some of these questions are ones that you might have as well, and maybe something I said made some sense and is helpful. If there are any that are helpful or unhelpful, let me know in the comments below. Perhaps I could articulate it a little better, maybe in a future video. If you do have any other questions that you would like me to answer, one of the places that I always answer questions at is at my Patreon. I actually do a monthly Q&A thing over there where you can leave your questions throughout the month, and then once a month I address all the questions in video form like this. I found that it's just easier to kind of like talk through an answer for me, and it's a little bit easier than like typing something out. So I do it in video form. It's the $5 tier and up, gets you access to all the Q&A stuff. And then there's other tiers above that, which is more like a sort of like coaching, teaching thing where we meet once a month virtually, and I could sort of help you with your work like one-on-one and really address like very specific questions and issues with your work and whatever challenges you might be running into with all of that. So yeah, if you're interested, check out the Patreon. I'll leave it in the description below. I'm actually gonna, after this, I'm gonna record this month's or last month's, something like that, Q&A for Patreon. So I got those questions here right now, but I figured I would do all my questions and answers in one sitting over here. So anyway, I hope this was helpful, somewhat interesting. August, thanks for the questions. That's it. I'm all talked out. I appreciate you watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.